My name is Andrea Acutis. I am 58 years old, and for 15 years I kept a secret that my son asked me, without ever using those exact words, to hold until the right moment arrived. I am telling it now because the right moment has come, and because I believe, no, I know, that Carlo would want it told exactly this way, in exactly this order, so that you could feel what I felt the night I finally understood what he had been doing all along. There is a photograph of my son that I keep on the small table beside my bed in Milan. He is wearing a white t-shirt and dark jeans, and he is laughing at something just outside the frame. You cannot see his shoes in that photograph, but I know what shoes he was wearing because he wore the same Nike sneakers until the soles were so thin you could feel the pavement through them. He refused to throw them away. He said that worn-out shoes meant you had actually gone somewhere. That was Carlo, 15 years old, gone before any of us understood who he really was. And yet, in ways I am still discovering, he had understood everything before he left. What I am about to share with you happened over the course of 19 years, but it began with a single afternoon, a single prayer, and a small bronze medal that my son never removed from his neck from the age of 7, until the morning the nurses in the pediatric oncology ward at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza prepared his body for the last time. I need you to stay with me, because this is not a simple story of grief. This is something else entirely. Before I tell you everything, a lot of people have asked how they can support this space. If this channel has meant something to you, there's a support page in the first pinned comment. If it's not your moment, that's okay. Now, let me tell you what happened. I was born in Milan in 1967. My husband, Andrea. Yes, we share the same name. Something that caused endless confusion at family dinners. Was born in Genoa. We met at university, married young, and spent the first years of our life together building careers, building habits, building the kind of comfortable, orderly existence that looks exactly like happiness from the outside. I worked in publishing. Andrea rose steadily through the ranks of a financial consulting firm. We traveled when we could. We loved each other genuinely, which is not as common as people pretend. Carlo arrived on the 3rd of May, 1991. We were living in London at the time. Andrea's firm had placed him there for an extended assignment, and I had followed with the particular mixture of excitement and quiet dread that comes with building a life in someone else's language. London was grey and beautiful and strange. Carlo arrived into that strangeness with his eyes wide open, as if he had been expecting exactly this. When he was still very small, perhaps 4, perhaps 5, we returned to Milan. My husband's family was there. My family was there. The city was home in a way that London, despite everything, had never quite become. We settled into an apartment in the Brera neighborhood, and Carlo began to show us, gradually, slowly, and then all at once, who he was. He was remarkable in ways that are difficult to explain without sounding like a grieving mother reaching for legend. So let me be precise instead. Carlo was funny. He had a particular kind of humor that operated on 3 levels simultaneously. There was always the obvious joke on the surface, and then something slightly stranger underneath it, and then, if you were paying attention, a third thing that was almost philosophical. He was the kind of child who made adults feel that they were being gently tested. He was also genuinely, unfashionably kind. Not in a performed way, not in the way children are sometimes coached to be kind because it reflects well on their parents. He was kind the way some people are tall. It was simply a condition of his existence. He loved computers with an intensity that belonged to another generation. He taught himself to build websites when he was 9 years old. He programmed. He designed. He understood code the way musicians understand chord progressions, not as rules to follow, but as a language with infinite possible sentences. By the time he was 11, he had begun building what would become his most important project, a digital catalog of Eucharistic miracles from around the world. He traveled to verify facts. He cross-referenced historical records. He built the site with meticulous care. And he did it, he told me once, because he wanted people to understand that the Eucharist was not a symbol. He was 11 years old when he said that. He also loved his cat, Polpetta. He loved his dog, Brizziola, and another dog named Stellina. He loved video games with the uncomplicated joy of any teenager. He played soccer in the courtyard behind our building. He watched films. He argued with me about what to have for dinner. He was a child, completely and normally, and wonderfully a child. And also, at the same time, something more. Something I could feel but never quite name, until it was too late for the naming to matter. The Saint Benedict medal came from his grandmother, my mother-in-law Antonietta, when Carlo was 7. It was a simple thing. Bronze, modest. The kind of medal that has been worn by Catholics for centuries, inscribed with the protective formula on one side and the image of the saint on the other. Carlo received it at a small ceremony in the family's parish, and from that day forward he wore it without interruption, hanging from the same thin chain as a small silver cross that Antonietta had given him for his baptism. He slept in it. He wore it to school. He wore it to Mass, daily Mass, which became his practice as a young child and never wavered. He wore it while sitting at his computer for hours, building his Eucharistic catalog. He wore it while playing with his animals. It was simply part of him, the way a particular gesture or a particular silence can be simply part of a person. I want to tell you something about Carlo and daily Mass, because I think it is important for what comes later. My son went to Mass every single day, not because he was told to, not because it was required of him, not because he feared what would happen if he skipped. He went because he believed that what happened at the altar was real. Physically, concretely, actually real. Not metaphorical, not commemorative. Real. He once tried to explain it to me. I am not a woman who thinks deeply about theology. I want to be honest about that. And he said, very calmly, Mama, when you are in front of the Eucharist, you are in front of something that is outside of time. All of time is present there. Every prayer that was ever prayed and every prayer that will ever be prayed. The past and the future are the same thing in that moment. I nodded as if I understood. I did not understand. I do now. The 19th of September 2006 was a Tuesday. Carlo had been in the house for most of the afternoon, but had gone to evening Mass at Santa Maria Segreta, a small church not far from our apartment. He came home at approximately 6 o'clock, while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. I heard him come in, heard him greet the dog, heard him put his school bag down in his room. Then he came to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame in that particular way he had. One shoulder against the wood, arms crossed loosely, and he said, Mama, something happened at Mass today. I turned from the stove. There was something in his voice. Not urgency, exactly. Gravity. The particular gravity that Carlo carried sometimes that made him seem much older than 15. He sat down at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface, the way someone does when they are about to say something they want to anchor. He told me that during the adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, he often stayed after Mass for adoration. At exactly 15 minutes and 17 seconds after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the metal around his neck had grown warm. Not the warmth of body heat accumulated over hours of wearing, something different, a heat with presence behind it. He had looked down, and then he had closed his eyes, and he had seen something. "I saw Papa," he said. He described it with the steady calm of someone reporting a fact, rather than a vision. He saw his father in his office at the financial firm, seated at his desk in the particular high-backed chair that Andrea always complained hurt his back. The office was empty except for his father. The city light through the windows behind him was the particular low gold of late afternoon. His father's face was in his hands, and his shoulders were moving the way shoulders move when someone is crying in silence. The kind of crying that only happens when a person believes they are completely alone. He was thinking about leaving, Carlo told me. Not us. His work. He was thinking that his whole life he had been chasing numbers that didn't mean anything, and that he was getting older and losing something he could never get back. He had his phone in his hand. He was about to call someone who could help him change careers. The metal got hot at exactly that moment. I put down the wooden spoon I had been holding. The kitchen was quiet except for the low sound of the gas on the stove. "Carlo," I said, "how could you know?" "I don't know how," he said simply, "but I know it's true. And Mama, there's something else. The metal is going to get warm again. I don't know exactly when, but I know it will happen when Papa is at that same point, that same crossroads, when he has to choose between the safe thing and the real thing. And when that happens, when you feel the heat, you'll know I'm there. You'll know I'm still with you both." I sat down across from him. I was trying to find the rational explanation, a teenager's intuition, an overactive imagination, the particular way adolescents sometimes turn their anxieties about their parents into narrative. I was reaching for something ordinary and finding nothing. "You speak as if," I began, and stopped. "I know, Mama," he said gently, "but don't be afraid. It's just the Eucharist. When you are really present before it, everything is present. Distance doesn't exist. Time doesn't exist. Papa is present to me in adoration the same way he is when we're in the same room. The love is the same. The connection is the same." He looked at me with that expression, the one I have spent 20 years trying to describe and still cannot. And then he said, "And if I'm not here when it happens, that doesn't change anything." I want to tell you that I argued with him. I want to tell you that I insisted he was being dramatic, or that I pulled him into a hug and told him nobody was going anywhere. But I did neither of those things. I simply held his gaze for a long moment, and then I turned back to the stove, and Carlo got up and went to feed the animals, and we ate dinner together as a family when Andrea came home. Late, with red eyes, claiming it had been a difficult day. I did not ask Andrea what had happened at the office that afternoon. I was afraid to know. 23 days later, on the 12th of October 2006, Carlo died of fulminant leukemia. The diagnosis had come with brutal speed, a fatigue that seemed normal at first, then a fever, then blood work that told us in numbers what the doctors then told us in words. He was hospitalized at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. He received the last rites on the 11th, the day before he died. His last words, according to the nurse who was with him in the final hour while I stepped briefly into the corridor, were an expression of gratitude for the life he had been given, for the suffering that was being offered up, for the goodness of God which he seemed to see clearly even then. He was 15 years old. He wore his Saint Benedict medal and his baptismal cross to the end. After his death, the medal was placed in a small box with a few other personal items: his student identification card, a prayer card for Our Lady of Guadalupe that he had carried for years, a USB drive that contained backups of his Eucharistic Miracles catalog, a handwritten note in his particular small cramped script that read only "Tutto offerto," everything offered. The box went onto the shelf in what had been his room, and I rarely opened it. It was not avoidance exactly. It was more that the box seemed complete, sealed, containing something that did not need me to look at it to remain true. Life continued in the way that life continues after the death of a child, which is to say, haltingly, unevenly, with long stretches of ordinary function interrupted without warning by moments that simply stop you in the middle of a sentence or a staircase or a Tuesday afternoon. Andrea and I established a foundation in Carlo's name. We worked with the diocese. We welcomed visitors who came to his tomb at Assisi after his beatification, and before that, at the sanctuary of Santa Maria della Spoccarica. We received letters from around the world, people who had prayed to Carlo and experienced things they could not explain. I read every one of them. I believed them in the abstract. But I held Carlo's personal promise, the one he had made in the kitchen on the 19th of September 2006, privately, in the quietest part of myself, not quite daring to think about it directly. I told no one, not my closest friend, not my sister, not Andrea. I held it the way you hold something fragile, loosely, carefully, aware that if you grip it too hard, it might shatter, and if you open your hand too wide, it might fall. Before I continue, a lot of people have asked me how they can support this space, so I created a support page. If this has touched you, it's in the first pinned comment. If this isn't your moment, that's completely okay. Just being here already means something. The years between 2006 and 2014 were years of reconstruction. There is no other word for what happens after a death like that. You do not recover exactly. You rebuild something on a foundation that has been permanently altered. The shape of everything is the same. The apartment, the neighborhood, the routines, but the weight is distributed differently, and you learn a new way of standing. Andrea changed. I noticed it most clearly in his relationship with time. He seemed, after Carlo's death, to have acquired a different relationship with urgency. He no longer rushed through meals. He was home more consistently. He coached a youth football team for 2 years, something he had never done before, something he continued doing long after the initial impulse might have faded. He was present in a way that I recognized distantly as something Carlo had somehow anticipated. But the financial world does not pause for grief. The firm Andrea worked for continued growing. His career continued its upward trajectory. And by 2013, it was clear that certain opportunities were approaching that would require certain decisions. The offer from the Swiss firm arrived in February of 2014. It was, there is no other way to say this, extraordinary. A senior directorship in Geneva, overseeing the financial operations of a firm 3 times the size of his current employer. The salary was transformational. The prestige was significant. On paper, in every professional calculation, it was precisely what a career like Andrea's had been building toward for 30 years. But we had built something in Milan. The foundation in Carlo's name was growing, coordinating the exhibition of Eucharistic miracles that Carlo had catalogued, now traveling to parishes and schools across the world, bringing thousands of young people into contact with a faith they had been told was irrelevant to modern life. Andrea was deeply involved. He had invested himself in this work in a way that surprised both of us. The financial executive who now spent his Saturday mornings in conversation with parish priests and his Wednesday evenings reviewing translation schedules for the exhibition's international tour. The offer from Geneva would mean leaving all of that, or not leaving it entirely, but leaving it in a way that would inevitably mean leaving it, travel schedules, distance, The slow centrifugal drift that takes people away from the things they love when the things they are obligated to do are very far away. Through February and into March of 2014, Andrea carried this decision in silence. I watched him carry it the way I had learned to watch him carry things, through the set of his jaw at dinner, through the particular quality of his stillness in the evenings, through the small signs that a person makes available to the people who love them when they are not yet ready to speak, but cannot entirely conceal. The night of March 24th arrived the way decisive nights always arrive, as an ordinary night that only announces itself in retrospect. I had been reading in the living room. It was late, nearly 11, and the apartment was quiet. Carlo's animals were long gone by then, and the particular quality of quiet in the apartment was one I had grown accustomed to, though never entirely comfortable with. I got up to bring Andrea a cup of coffee. He had been in his study for several hours. I assumed he was working, as he often was in the evenings. I pushed open the study door without knocking. We had never knocked for each other, in all our years of marriage. And I stopped. He was seated at his desk, but not working. The papers from the Geneva offer were spread across the surface of the desk in front of him. He had both hands over his face. His shoulders were moving in the way that shoulders move when a person is crying in silence, believing themselves entirely alone. I stood in the doorway for a moment, and in that moment, with the coffee cup in my hand, looking at my husband's bowed head, I heard, with perfect clarity, my son's voice from a kitchen on a September evening 8 years earlier. "You'll know I'm there." I set the coffee cup down on the small table beside the door. I walked back to Carlo's room. His former room, the room we had kept exactly as it was, in the way that bereaved parents sometimes do, not out of paralysis, but out of a kind of love that has nowhere else to go. I opened the shelf. I took the small box, and with hands that were not quite steady, I opened the box and lifted out the Saint Benedict medal on its thin chain. It was cool to the touch, normal. The bronze had the particular ambient temperature of an object that has sat undisturbed for years. I carried it to the study. I did not explain. I sat down beside Andrea, and I waited until he lifted his face from his hands, until he looked at me with the particular wrecked openness that people show only to those who have seen them at their absolute worst. And then I held out my hand with the medal in my palm, and I said, "Take it. Just hold it for a moment." He looked at the medal. He knew what it was. He had seen it around Carlo's neck every day for 8 years. He looked at me. Something in my face must have communicated that this was not a moment for questions, because he simply reached out and took the medal and closed his hand around it. I watched his face. For a long moment, nothing. The study was very quiet. The city outside the window made its low, constant sound. And then I saw it. The change in his expression. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. A small widening of the eyes and a particular stillness that looks, from the outside, like a person who has just heard their name called in a place where no one should know them. "Andrea," he said. It's warm." I could hear the particular quality in his voice. The disbelief trying to organize itself against the direct evidence of sensation. "Both hands," I said softly. He cupped the medal between both palms, and I knew, without touching it, simply from the expression on his face, that the warmth was real and growing, and nothing that could be explained by body heat or ambient temperature or the particular acoustics of wishful thinking. He looked at me. "What?" And I told him everything. For the first time since that September Tuesday in 2006, I told it all. The kitchen, the wooden spoon, Carlo sitting at the table with his hands flat on the surface, the description of his father in his office, with his face in his hands, the phone call that was about to happen, the promise that the metal would grow warm again at exactly this kind of crossroads, the instruction, which had not been framed as an instruction but was clearly an instruction, that when that happened, we would know that Carlo was there. I spoke quietly and steadily. Andrea held the medal with both hands throughout, and I watched the warmth in it register on his face, in the particular way that extraordinary things register on the faces of people who had not believed in extraordinary things until this moment. When I finished, he was very still. Tears were moving down his face, without any apparent effort on his part. The automatic tears of someone who has been reached by something they cannot contain. He knew, Andrea said finally, in 2006. He knew he wasn't going to be here. Yes, I said, he knew about the Geneva offer. He didn't know the specific details. He knew there would be a moment, a crossroads. Andrea looked down at the medal in his cupped hands. It's still warm, he said. And then, after a moment, it's like a hand holding my hand. I do not have better words for what happened that night. I have tried, in the years since, to find them, and I keep arriving at the same limitation. The experience was not designed for language. It was designed for exactly what it was. A man alone in a room with a decision he was afraid of, receiving the warmth of his dead son's love through a bronze medal on a cold night in March. The next morning, Andrea called the Swiss firm and declined the offer. He thanked them, said only that it was not the right moment, and returned the papers to a file that has never been opened since. The medal, after that night, returned to its ordinary temperature. I held it myself the following morning, and it was cool. Normal metal at room temperature, nothing more. I held it at intervals over the following months and years, not out of superstition but out of a quiet need to verify, and it was always simply cool. A bronze medal, an ordinary object. But the night of March 24th had happened. We had both felt it. It was not something that could be undiscovered. I want to tell you now about October 2020, because this is where the story opens into something I still cannot entirely look at directly. Something that changes the entire architecture of what came before. The beatification ceremony took place on the 10th of October 2020 in Assisi. Carlo was formally declared Blessed Carlo Acutus in the lower basilica of the Basilica of St. Francis. A ceremony that Andrea and I attended with indescribable feelings. The particular vertigo of seeing your child's face on banners and hearing his name pronounced in the formal cadences of liturgical Latin. He was the first person born in the second half of the 20th century to be beatified by the Catholic Church. He was 15 years old when he died. He wore Nike sneakers and wrote code and fed his animals and went to daily Mass and understood something about time and love and presence that most of us never understand at all. After the ceremony, in the weeks that followed, I felt, for the first time since his death, a genuine urgency to complete something I had always postponed. In the years after Carlo died, we had preserved his computers and hard drives with the care that archivists apply to primary sources, but we had never fully explored everything they contained. We had recovered the Eucharistic Miracles catalog, of course, and many personal files and his photographs and music. But there were folders I had never opened, files whose titles I did not recognize, and a number of items in an archive folder marked with the simple Italian word vari, miscellaneous. I asked a family friend, a man named Giorgio, who worked as a systems engineer and had been part of Carlo's world of digital enthusiasm, to help me conduct a thorough review of everything that remained on the drives. We sat together at the dining room table one afternoon in late October. The drives connected to Giorgio's laptop. the archived files unfolding across the screen in their hierarchical order. Most of what we found was expected. Hundreds of images and documents related to the Eucharistic Miracles Project, research notes in Carlo's particular shorthand, early drafts of web design layouts, a collection of saved articles about topics ranging from quantum physics to the lives of the saints, playlists organized by occasion and mood. The ordinary digital life of an extraordinary 15-year-old. And then Giorgio paused. He had navigated into a subfolder within the miscellaneous archive, a folder that had been set to hidden, meaning it would not have appeared in normal browsing. The folder's name was 3 words in Italian, per dopo, for afterward. Inside the folder were 12 files. Most were images. 3 were short text documents. Giorgio opened them in sequence, and I read them as they appeared on the screen. And I will not tell you what most of them contained, because most of them are not my story to tell. They were addressed to specific people, specific friends and relatives, and have been shared privately with those individuals in the years since. But the 11th file, Giorgio opened it, and I saw its title before I saw its contents, was named Papa 2014 tag. I put my hand on Giorgio's arm. He stopped. He looked at me. "Open it," I said. He opened it. The document was short. Carlo had never been verbose. His communication was always precise, without ornament. And this document was no exception. It read as follows: "Papa, if you're reading this, it's because Mama finally went through my files. I already know I won't be here much longer. The doctors don't know yet, but I can feel it. Today, during adoration, I saw something. I saw you in your office, sad, lost. I saw that you were going to have to choose again in a few years between money and purpose. I want you to know that the Saint Benedict medal I wear every day is not just a medal. Since I was 7 years old, I have prayed every day that that medal would protect you, that when you are afraid or confused, you could feel that you are not alone. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know that the Eucharist connects everything: the past, the present, the future, heaven and earth, the living, and those of us who have already gone. When the medal grows warm in your hand, you will know that it is my way of saying, 'I'm here, Papa. Choose love. Choose what really matters. I love you. Carlo.'" The file's creation date was September 18th, 2006. One day before Carlo came home from evening mass at Santa Maria Segreta and sat down at the kitchen table and told me about the medal growing warm. He had written the letter before he told me about the vision. He had written the letter before the vision, or on the same day as the vision, or, and this is the possibility that stops all other thinking, at some point adjacent to the experience of adoration that defies the ordinary grammar of before and after entirely. The file had been on that hard drive for 14 years. Waiting. Giorgio and I sat in silence for a long time after reading it. The afternoon light in the apartment moved through its usual arc across the floor. Somewhere in the building above us, someone was playing music. The ordinary world continued in its ordinary way. I called Andrea. He came home early. We sat together at the dining room table with Giorgio's laptop between us, and we read the file together, and then we read it again. And then we did not speak for a very long time. I want to be precise about what Carlo's letter revealed, because I think precision matters here more than anywhere. He wrote it on the 18th of September. He told me about the medal on the 19th. This means that before he came home and sat at the kitchen table and described what he had experienced during adoration, the warmth, the vision of his father, the promise of future warmth, He had already written down for his father the mechanism of what would happen and why. He had written, "When the metal grows warm in your hand," before he told me the metal had grown warm. He had written, "Choose love, choose what really matters," as a message for a moment in 2014 before he described, in the kitchen, that such a moment would come. The letter was not a response to the vision. The letter was simultaneous with the vision, or prior to it, or both, which means that the vision and the letter, and the warmth and the promise were all part of a single event that does not fit inside the sequence that ordinary time requires. Carlo understood this. He wrote it himself. The Eucharist connects everything: the past, the present, the future, heaven and earth, the living and those who have gone. He was 15 years old, and he understood this the way he understood code, not as a metaphor, but as a fact about the structure of reality. I think about him now, and I see him on that September day, at his computer in the morning, perhaps, writing the letter with the same careful precision he brought to his Eucharistic catalogue, knowing with the certainty of someone who has stood before the really real that the words needed to be preserved, and that the right technology for preservation was the digital archive, the hidden folder, the hard drive that would outlast him. Then to Mass in the afternoon, then into adoration, into that state that he had described to me once as being outside of time. Then home, with the warmth still in his memory and the vision still clear, to sit with me at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface and say it out loud, not to inform me, but to make it real in language, to give me something to hold. He was doing two things at once, on two different levels of reality, and both of them were acts of love. The medal came out of the box after that October afternoon and went around Andrea's neck. He has worn it every day since. It has not grown warm again. He does not expect it to. The warmth was a message delivered at a specific moment for a specific reason, and the message was received, and what remained after the message was the ongoing fact of love, which does not need to announce itself repeatedly to be real. I am not a theologian. I want to be honest about that again, here at the end, because I think it matters. I am a woman from Milan who worked in publishing and raised a son who turned out to be, in ways we are still discovering, a person of genuinely extraordinary interior life. I did not understand most of what Carlo understood. I do not understand most of it now, but I have spent the years since his beatification, since sitting at that dining room table with Giorgio's laptop and reading a letter written by a 15-year-old to his father 8 years before the moment it was written for, trying to find the words for what I know. And what I know is this: my son was not unusual because he was saintly in the sense that word sometimes implies remote, otherworldly, polished smooth of all ordinary humanness. He was unusual because he was fully human. Nike sneakers, video games, joy about animals, frustration at homework, warmth for his friends, and also, at the same time and in the same breath, oriented toward something real that most of us spend our lives half glimpsing and half turning away from. The Eucharist was not, for Carlo, a practice. It was an encounter with a fact, and that fact, that in the Eucharist all of time is present, that love does not obey the sequence of before and after, that a bronze medal worn every day for 8 years holds something of the prayer that accompanied it every single morning. That fact was not something he believed in the sense of choosing to accept, despite uncertainty. It was something he knew the way he knew code. From the inside, from having worked in it, from direct experience of its operations. He left us a bridge, not a metaphor of a bridge, an actual bridge, built in digital architecture on a hidden drive, preserved through 14 years of technological change, opened at exactly the moment when it needed to be opened. If this story found you today, it wasn't by accident. And if you feel called to support this space, the first pinned comment has a page where that's possible. If this isn't your moment, I'm grateful you made it to the end. Truly. I read sometimes, in the letters that arrive from people who have prayed to Carlo, accounts of warmth experienced during prayer, a sudden heat on the skin, a feeling of a hand held, a sensation of presence that is warm in the specific way that presence is warm and the absence of presence is not. I do not tell people that this is impossible. I do not tell people that they are imagining it. I tell them what I know from a kitchen on a Tuesday evening in September 2006, and a study on a night in March 2014, and a dining room table in October 2020, that Carlo understood something true about the nature of love, and the nature of time, and the nature of what happens when you put yourself, really and completely, before the fact of the Eucharist. He told me himself at 15, in the kitchen, with both hands flat on the table. When you are in front of the Eucharist, you are in front of something that is outside of time. All of time is present there. He was right. He had been there. He knew. Today, I wake up in the apartment in Milan, in the neighborhood we have lived in for decades. On the table beside my bed is the photograph of Carlo laughing at something outside the frame. In the room that was his room, there is still the shelf with the small box, though the box is lighter now. The medal that was in it is around my husband's neck. The USB drive with the Eucharistic Miracles catalog is still there. The prayer card for Our Lady of Guadalupe. The handwritten note in Carlo's small, cramped script. Tutto offerto. Everything offered. I get up in the morning and I go about the ordinary work of a day in 2026. Correspondence, the Foundation's ongoing projects, the particular administrative life that surrounds a cause for canonization. Carlo's canonization, when it comes, will not change what he was or what happened in that kitchen, in that study, in that dining room. It will simply make official, in the language of the Church, what a 15-year-old already knew on the afternoon of September 19, 2006, coming home from evening mass in his worn-out Nike sneakers, that love is real, that it persists, that it operates across whatever distance we call death with the same consistency that code operates across a system. Reliably, structurally, according to laws that are more fundamental than the ones we usually pay attention to. My son was a boy who understood computers and animals, and the Eucharist, and the particular stubbornness of worn-out shoes. He was a boy who wrote a letter to his father for a moment 8 years in the future, and hid it in a folder called Perdopo, on a hard drive that outlasted him. He wore a medal that grew warm once, precisely when it needed to. And if you are carrying something today, a decision, a crossroads, a grief, a fear, I want to tell you what Carlo would tell you if he were sitting here with both hands flat on this surface, looking at you with that particular expression that was young and ancient simultaneously. You are not alone in it. The love that surrounds you is not limited by the boundaries you think it is, and sometimes in ways you might not expect, in objects and temperatures and file creation dates and the specific warmth of a late October afternoon in a room where someone you love once sat. The truth of that makes itself available to you. Carlo Acutis, born May 3, 1991 in London, died October 12, 2006, in Monza, of fulminant leukemia, 15 years old. Beatified October 10, 2020, in Assisi, my son. Blessed Carlo, pray for us, and for all of those who are holding something that is too heavy to hold alone. Blessed Carlo Acutis, intercede for us.